Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today in this virtual Zoom room. I am so excited that I get to be here also. Welcome to the Visioning Outside the Parameters of Realism panel with Aunt Lute Books. I'm really honored to get to receive the amazing medicine that is these generative literary conversations in these hard times. I think it's really important to understand the world as changeable and justice as possible. These are necessary sort of magics in fighting the oppressive systems we all live in today. And I'm grateful to take this time to be here with our amazing panelists and moderator. My name is Emma. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Director of Acquisitions and Programming at Aunt Lute Books. This event in particular spotlights Black women who are expanding our collective understanding of what is possible through literature. And before we get into the magic of today's panel, I want to acknowledge that Aunt Lute operates on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional homeland. And we wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. This statement serves as an ongoing commitment to solidarity with the Indigenous and First Peoples here. I personally am currently located on Leiston Ohlone land, and I encourage everyone pop into the chat and share the land that you are joining us from. And if you haven't and you're in the Bay Area, please pay your land tax. We support the Segurayate Land Trust. They have the Shumi land tax. And we'll include links to this in the chat so that you can support the work of rematriating this land. Some announcements. This event is being recorded and it will be published later online this week. We'll send it out to everyone who RSVP'd. We'll put it on our website. So if you need to jump off, totally fine. We have subtitles on, but if you're having any trouble following them, please feel free to send a message in the chat if you want any clarity on anything said. We'll do our best to make this experience as accessible as possible. And we've included some links to our interactive intro presentation for anyone to add to in our chat. And there are some pages that are calling for suggestions of writers and orgs in need of attention. And so please feel free, throw things in. And so I think those are all of our announcements. So without further ado, I want to welcome the fabulous Ellen McBarnette to the screen, who will be our amazing moderator for tonight. Ellen is a writer based in Hayward, and she's active in several writers groups. She's active in the California Writers Club, specifically the Berkeley branch, active in the Women's National Book Association. And then something that's very exciting for me and for today is the Afrosurreal Writers Workshop of Oakland. And she is also a speculative fiction writer and various other genres, and formerly was an environmental lobbyist. So welcome, Ellen, and I'll hand it over to you.
Emma, thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here. I was quite flattered by the invitation when I saw all the other folks who would be here. I had to question it though. I was like, why? Why this set of amazing writers, amazing literary professionals? Why did this group make sense? And it became so obvious. This is a group of activists. This is a group of artists. This is a group of folks who are willing to try different ways and different tools and methods to achieve the goals of, well, of the literary profession, but also of the culture moving profession, ways of editing the life of our communities and trying to reach a better space. I'll be introducing them individually, but I did want to point out that within our group, we have a climate activist. We have a explorer of the horror genre, an explorer of the past in one's childhood, and also explorer of the past in a deeper sense. We have a nationally renowned bookseller who has created a new type of space to explore speculative fiction coming from the African diaspora. And we have a playwright, an award-winning playwright, who is not only creating new worlds on stage, but also creating new genres as she works on her debut novel. So thank you so much for bringing me here to meet with these folks and to have this conversation that is about to commence. Thank you, Emma. And thank you to the publisher. I'd like to start and introduce individually, but I would like to have each tell more about themselves. So my first introduction would be to Michele Tracy Berger. Michele is a horror writer in the what I call the Afrosurreal tradition. But Michele, would you call it Afrosurreal, or how would you define your writing?
That's such a beautiful question. I write in and between the areas of Afrofuturism, even though my work is not all futurist-centric. It's really about how to think about the canons of aesthetics that have depicted Black people, African descendant people, and then writing across and through and around and challenging some of those traditional canons. And I feel like I'm a person who was writing before the rubric of Afrofuturism became such a thing, and really trying to find my place. And so I always like to say I write through the African-American literary tradition with an emphasis on speculative work. But I love Afrosurreal. I love your rubric as well.
Oh, thanks. It's amazing to me how there can be, allow the academicians, well, you are an academician, aren't you? But allow the academicians to put us into the proper boxes. But as we are creating, it's amazing how different creators define their works. I know that within the Afro-surreal tradition, some folks see it as a coin with the front being Afrofuturism and the edge and the tail being Afrosurrealism. Others see Afrofuturism as being the entire coin. When you write, do you actually compartmentalize? Do you actually use a genre in your head while you're writing, or how do you approach that?
So I write speculative fiction that is kind of across the whole universe of what we think of as speculative fiction, which is an umbrella term, as most people know. But I do contemporary fantasy. I do some sort of things that are hard to classify as sort of weird, slipstream, as well as more traditional sci-fi. But most of my work usually has some element of psychological horror. And I like to think that I write about everyday people who are in extraordinary situations. And sometimes that looks, a bit unusual. So it's really kind of this, more of a feeling that I'm going for than specifically. I'm trying to just write in that particular area.
I see that. There's a catharsis in horror, isn't there? There's this kind of blast of fear followed by a sense of relief. But how do you, as the writer, once you're immersing yourself in this tale, how do you protect yourself from the horror within?
I like to say horror is really a feeling. So horror can be evoked across a variety of kind of literary forms. I don't know for me if it's about always protecting myself. I feel very committed to telling the stories of Black women and women of color, and being trying to be unafraid of where that takes me. I think I do other kinds of self-care things more generally as a writer, but for me, it's really kind of going, when I have the character, I try to go as far as I can with that character in the context of their journey. And when I think about, if I can just elaborate for just a minute about, I wasn't someone who grew up really reading a lot of horror fiction as a young person. I read actually more kind of traditional sci-fi and fantasy, but I was exposed to a lot of horror media. And I think that horror gives us a way to think about outsiderness and to explore outsiderness, and particularly for Black women and women of color, thinking about how we tend to be, I heard someone put it, perpendicular to culture, in terms of thinking about some of the ways in which we don't get represented. So for me, horror is about, kind of dealing with some of those contradictions, exploring some of those contradictions, and writing us back into spaces, telling our own stories. And when I recently I was like, let me go back and read some more traditional horror writers from the 70s and 80s. There's so little there for us. And it's really interesting to see there's very little there. Horror now is in more contemporary spaces, but even still, we're not really fully fleshed out beings, I think, in a lot of the horror spaces that are written by others. So I'll stop there. I'll pause there.
Oh, no, continue. We will get back to that, especially the question of otherness. We will be exploring that further on in our conversation. Thanks for joining in. The next person I wanted to introduce and bring into the conversation is Aya de Leon. Aya is I'm hesitating from just talking all about her climate work because I'm excited so much about her climate work. We live in a time period when there's an existential crisis hanging over us all. And it's a huge delight to me to see someone who has focused so much time, attention, and deep thought in addressing it. I also interested in pointing out the connection between in the 1950s, when we think of so many of the horror classics. The horror classics were a reaction to the existential crisis that was the atomic bombs and the beginning of weapons of destruction that could literally destroy the world. So it's interesting to me now that this new era of horror, it's during this new existential crisis. Aya, can you come in and tell us about your activism as well as your writing? And we'll talk about your imprints too, but yes, please come on in.
Sure. So first of all, I want to say I'm really honored to be here today. I've been a fan of Aunt Lute since the 90s. And I'm delighted to be here in conversation with Black women, especially in the speculative fiction world, because I feel like some of the most exciting work is coming out of those kind of overlapping genres. And I write contemporary realistic fiction. But I also belong here in writing beyond the parameters of realism, because basically, in order to address the climate crisis, we have to change what reality is, right? So I think of myself as a climate writer and a climate activist in the tradition of Adrienne Maree Brown and Walida Imarisha, with Octavia's Brood, where they were like, activists are really science fiction authors because they're trying to change the future. And so right now, my biggest kind of narrative intervention is around these ideas of apocalypse, right? I think what I'd like to see is I would like to see apocalypse and dystopia existing exclusively in fiction as we actually engage in the fight to create our reality, in a different way and move towards a world that is actually more just, more environmentally sustainable, has greater human rights and less war. And to that end, I write mostly heist and spy fiction in the service of climate justice. And so for me, heist is basically groups of people saying, the resources are not being distributed properly, and we're just going to redistribute them. We're not going to have a petition drive or try and get elected. We're just going to take what we know should be ours, right? So that's sort of a very direct approach around creating a different kind of future, these characters, for their communities. And, you know, as someone who's worked in many nonprofits, I think nonprofit workers know there's that moment where you're like working on grant proposal number 576 and someone's like, why don't we just rob a bank? Ah, and the reason we don't do it is that we would do a bad job and we'd get caught and our organization would close. But that's why I'm a fiction writer, because I can write the story where they're better at this than I would be and they can succeed. And spy, I'm really fascinated with. So I wrote a heist series that had 4 books, and now I'm pretty kind of neck deep in spy and domestic espionage. That's kind of my main thing these days. And I just think, you know, in that particular genre, I have a young adult series, a kind of middle grade young adult series, the Factory series, and it's about these teen spy girls who are in this organization that they sort of call the Factory, which is an international spy organization that protects people of color and fights racism. And that, again, is sort of like, you know, as we're in this time where we're finally, you know, at a broader level talking about defunding the police and looking at law enforcement and like, what laws are being enforced for whom? And is this working? You know, the idea of actual law enforcement that was working for the people, particularly for people of color, that was investigating kind of international crimes having to do with racism. The first one has to do with this teen girl who is part of an operation trying to stop a white supremacist terrorist. So this is, again, you know, even though I write contemporary realistic fiction, there are always these places in my work that are about stuff that isn't happening, hasn't happened yet, and things that I would like to see happen. And I think the place with my climate fiction for adults, with every book, I'm sort of getting bolder and bolder. You know, my most recent book, wait, let me pull this one out. And I brought some books. My most recent book, That Dangerous Energy, spoiler alert, you know, I start moving towards climate reparations. And really, with one of the books that I'm working on now, I really want to get there. I want to write the story of how we get to a just transition, you know, because I believe that fiction really can help us imagine what we don't yet have. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Though I do want to ask you more about your imprint. How did you come from being a writer addressing a particular concern? And well, we will talk more. I am very excited about the climate concern and your work on it. How did you come to also become essentially a publisher? That's a huge.
Yes. Well, you know, I'm still in the step. I can't say I've gotten there yet, but, you know, one thing for me as an author, you know, when I'm anxious, I write. So in the pandemic, I worked on an insane number of books and projects because it was a time of such high anxiety. But no matter how anxious I am or how many books I write, it's just not really enough. You know, I'm interested in creating sort of an avalanche of books as propaganda for climate justice and the climate movement. And I realized that if I was going to do that, I needed to work, I needed to not just publish my own work, but see if I could publish and commission other folks. So, you know, it's a pretty intense undertaking. Initially, there were some things going on and we thought we might be able to launch in 2023, but, you know, it looks like more like 2024, 25. So that's something that I'm inching towards. And I know my folks at Aunt Lute know how hard it is. Like, publishing is a really challenging industry to get into, but, you know, I'm holding that vision. and continuing to work on my own work in the meantime.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, and I'll just say that the imprint is Fighting Chance Books, and it's an imprint at She Writes Press that focuses exclusively on climate fiction, and they have to be stories set in the here and now about groups of people working collectively to solve the climate crisis. And she writes traditionally. Oh, yes.
Will you put a lot of that in the chat?
Oh, good. Yes, I will right now.
About our time, and yes. I definitely don't want to miss a word of that.
Great. I'll put it all in the chat for you.
I would like to bring Kathya in.
Great.
Because this is a great segue, because we're talking about bringing our literary, well, let me change that metaphor, trying on different literary clothes. And Kathya, you are, I should say the full introduction. This is Kathya Alexander. She is based in Seattle, and she is an award-winning playwright. I'm so excited to read that you won an award at the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. That is like one of the best of the playwright of the theatrical festivals in the entire world.
Yeah, I was pretty excited. It's been like over 20 years ago, though.
Yeah, award-winning playwright. Wow. I know you are also an activist in the Pacific Northwest and nationally, and you are now working on your debut novel. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the connection between working as a playwright, in which you're creating a piece of art that is very time-bound. It's a performance, and at the end of the performance, the art is a different thing, as compared to a novel, which I understand is being written in verse, and the connection between the spoken word in the time-bound performance versus on the page.
So it seems like it took forever to write the novel, so I don't really have a lot of insight about it at this point. It is a novel in verse, and my activism, I guess, comes more from through my writing as opposed to marching or, other types of activism.
Absolutely. I mean, you were a writer in residence at excuse me, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, Hedgebrook.
Yes.
Women Writers Retreat. And how did you come to be there?
Actually, I just kind of kept applying until they finally chose me. So I will say it's a wonderful, wonderful place. I actually, probably for the first time, really considered myself a writer at Hedgebrook. And that's just because they treated me as a writer at Hedgebrook. So if you ever get the opportunity to go, please do. And like I said, if you get turned down the first time, it took me 3 times before I got in. And I was actually there with a woman who had applied 8 times before she got in. So I just say, keep trying, and it's worth all the disappointment of being turned down. But for me, I think I'm probably the oldest person in this group. And so I came of age during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And I've kind of made it my life work to keep that time alive. And particularly because I'm also a storyteller, and I write a lot of short stories, and a lot of them have to do with the civil rights movement. I'm also a teaching artist, and so I'm in the schools a lot with kids who have no clue about what the civil rights movement actually is. And it's almost like, they kind of teach that Rosa Parks sat on a bus, Martin Luther King gave a speech, and everything changed. It's kind of how the kids look at it, because that's all the information that they're given. And I happen to know, I grew up in the South, and so I happen to know that there were a lot of ordinary people that were doing things on a local level. And quite often, Martin Luther King, or maybe all the time, Martin Luther King was called in to assist these local people, mainly because after the Montgomery bus boycott, he got national attention. And so local people could get national attention if Martin Luther King got involved. And there were other activists who really didn't want the attention that Martin Luther King brought with him. So, in the civil rights movement of the 1960s was really like one of the most successful social justice movements in this country. And I think it's really a shame that people don't know it when people all over the world are using that model to make changes in their societies and countries. And so a lot of stuff that I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to point out how humble you're being when you say that you're not an activist, and yet here I hear you actively continuing one of the most activist time periods of.
Yeah, I guess not to say that I'm not an activist. I think I said I use my work as my activism, because
I stand corrected.
I do get in people's face a lot with my work. And I know when we were talking.
I'd like to bring someone in on the conversation at this point, because I'd like to bring you all together as a group in discussing these interesting challenges. Please keep your thought, because I want us to get back to it. But I want to bring in Isis Asare. Isis is Isis is an entrepreneur who has started the nationally known I'm going to start stuttering, excuse me, Sistah Space bookstore. Now, when I first heard of Sistah Space bookstore, I thought it was an online presence exclusively, and I bought from it online, not realizing it's just down the street. It is in Oakland. I thought it was online and based out in the ether or somewhere on the East Coast, because I just heard about it so much. I went to a wonderful event organized by your group, Isis. Janelle Monáe was discussing her book, her speculative fiction book that she edited and co-wrote with some amazing people. Cherie Renee Thomas, editor of Sci-Fi, Science Fiction and Fantasy magazine, and a bunch of others. And I met you there for a hot minute. It was so crowded. It was so wonderful. And again, I still was convinced that you were a national presence out there somewhere. I didn't realize you were local. Wow. What's it like being like such a mover and shaker?
I mean, that's somewhat intentional. It's like Sistah Scifi. We are located in cyberspace. Like, I'm just like zooming around on a spaceship. So I'm glad that brand experience is landing. I do remember you at the Janelle Monáe event. It was crazy. Like, there was so much going on. But yes, but in reality, outside the brand experience, I live on Earth. My apartment is in Oakland, California, and apparently it's down the street. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. So like I like when I was I was like, I had so much deep imposter syndrome, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna be here. I'm so grateful.
Please, I am so grateful to have your presence and to be able to share your presence with the folks who are here. You, as a bookseller, are the conduit between us and our audience, the writers and the audience. You have your fingers on two different pulses, two different sets of pulses, and you have an understanding of where things are going. Would love to hear, why did Sister Space focus exclusively on the speculative fiction area? What brought you to that decision? And in fact, why did you name it Sister Space? Tell us a little bit about your decisions there.
Yeah, so I started Sistah Scifi because I just finished reading Lilith's Brood with a friend, and she was like, "Don't you know about Tomi Adeyemi and Nnedi Okorafor?" I'm like, "No," and I was like, "Nobody is going to miss this memo on my watch. Like, we're all going to know how prolific Black women and Indigenous women are in the speculative fiction space." Because a lot of times, particularly science fiction, it's like you think of 14-year-old white boys, and it's like readers and consumers of speculative fiction are far more diverse than that. And simply put, they're Black people in the future. So that was the impetus. I was like, nobody else is going to miss this memo on my watch. And you know, particularly that first year, like it started in 2019 and 2020, people were like, yeah, you know, because publishers aren't publishing this work. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. There are like hundreds of Black and Indigenous women writing science fiction and fantasy. I was like, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote science fiction and fantasy. Like, just because you don't know doesn't mean it exists. So also wanted to debunk that. And then also like science fiction has offered me so many new and unique frameworks in moving in a society that tells me that I'm powerless. And just follow up on like the conversations about perseverance. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm gonna read it, it's really quick, is by Octavia Butler. Forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is perseverance and practice. And when like something falls through, or like some organization where it's like it should be yes, or they like email me and they're like, hey sis, why don't you just work for free? Because of course you have unlimited time and energy. I'm just like, what would Octavia Butler do? She would say, focus on your habits, focus on your perseverance, keep taking that step, keep inspecting those potato chips if you have to, and keep it pushing.
Lovely, lovely. Her works, of course, were, or more accurately, her papers, her personal papers, were in an exhibit in Oakland, in the Oakland Museum a few months ago. And yeah, it is wonderful to be able to touch that, to touch her inspirations and touch her wisdom. Thank you for reminding us of our, she's not an ancestor yet. She is an ancestor, but I don't want to let her go yet. She's here. She's still here. I'd love to hear from our other panelists about that particular point that you brought up of habit and persistence, and how that inspires their work as writers, but also how it inspires their work as business owners, because isn't a writer's business writing? So Michele, you were the first, so can we start with you?
The writer's business and life keeps expanding, because not only are we at this moment in time, and I'm in my mid-50s, so I remember the time of, you know, Stephen King going on book tours, and Nora Roberts and Jackie Collins, and a different era where people wrote. They definitely work with their fan base, but writers now really are, you know, small business owners, and we have to cultivate that mindset. And so I love what you were saying, Isis, about that persistence, and other people, persistence, perseverance, and then having that, and I would add then the self-love, because we have to believe in ourselves enough prior to sometimes we're ahead of the markets. And I was thinking what a little bit about what Aya said about the work that she does. And I think that, Black women, women of color, Indigenous women writers, we are often reshaping the genres. So thinking about what Aya was saying about spy thriller, that work, climate change, and horror, and other, and Kathya's work. So that's also a piece of what's so exciting about this new moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Aya, do you want to respond or have a comment to in relation?
Yeah, I think, I think it's really important to talk about this piece because kind of out there in the world of authors, there's lots of hidden stuff around class and money. There are lots of people who are out there writing and we're just like, oh, it's all good. And then you find out like they have a trust fund or they have a husband working in Silicon Valley or they got something going on. And so they have a particular relationship to the economics of writing that don't include being a working writer. But the reality is that most artists in general and most authors are part of the working class, and writing is definitely a working class hustle. And so I think it's really good to talk about that. I come out of, and, there are other folks in here coming out of all kinds of different types of writing. Currently I'm a novelist. My debut novel came out in 2016. But prior to that, I was a spoken word artist. I was a hip hop theater artist. I hustled a lot of chapbooks over the years that I, made myself at the copy spot down the street, and frankly got offered a book deal and turned it down because I could make more money hustling chapbooks at the time because poetry doesn't sell that much, So I do think it's really important to be in these conversations about like, what's the business piece? Because I think especially for us as Black women coming out of, the experiences, Black women in the Americas and just worldwide, Black women's labor is so devalued, right? So enslavement being like the ultimate devaluation, like you get nothing, like we own all of it, we own you, and even though that ownership was never like legitimate or real, it certainly was how things operated for a long time. So coming out of that, I think it's really challenging for us to figure out how to make a living doing anything that isn't about enriching other people, right? Like the tracks and jobs for Black women are generally about how can we make other people rich, and at best maybe we can make some decent money at the same time. But writing is this whole other thing economically that's about like how can the visions and ideas in our minds be center stage, and that is really radical. And so that's like as Black folks, but also Black women who, our job from the moment we were brought to these shores was to take care of other people. I remember folks talking about that book, The Help, right? And so it was like, people like, girl, you need to ask for help. It's hard for us to ask for help because we are the help, right? Like we are not set up to feel like our dreams and visions other people should be investing in. And it's like a lot to work through to get to that place. So I just think it's important to talk about the economics, and I've written for a couple of different publishers, they've all been independent, have made, different amounts of money. I do a lot of writing for free. I've done other writing that gets paid. I do speaking engagements for free. Some get paid. It's like lots of different parts to the hustle. I work a day job at UC Berkeley and I love, I'm in Black studies, thank goodness. And it's also a day job, so these things are super complicated, but I just think it's really important for Black women to be talking about this and not participating in that sort of like trust fund fantasy of like, oh, writing, it's just so beautiful. Like, let's not talk about money. For those of us who are working for a living, let's talk about the money. So I'll put that out there.
Thank you. And
that's a huge part of it too, because again, I live in Seattle and there are a lot of people with money. I happen not to be one of them, but And I have met a lot of writers who don't need the money, and they are always looking at me cross-eyed, like people will walk up to me all the time and say, "Oh, you should tell your stories at such and such a place." And my response is always, "Do they pay?" Because I'm trying to get paid, and then the famous word is, "Oh, you'll get exposure," And my response to that is always, when I do things for free, I'm teaching people that I will do things for free, and I don't know that I've ever gotten a real gig out of something that I for exposure, and so that is a big part of it. I call it the business of writing, and it is, and I'm not good at it, really. I'm not good at the business part of it and marketing myself. And thank God for Aunt Lute, who has a marketing person, because I'm not good at it, but I am good at saying I want to get paid. And I think that that's something that we all need to, as Black women, do proudly and ask for the money.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to ask you about taking your content that you have created, your creation, and finding different ways of moving that content into the marketplace. So if you have a play that you've written, do you turn around and then create a book from that? Do you turn around and create stories from that? How do you take your content and expand on it?
Well, one of the things that I like about plays is that they are designed to the public. And so I can write as many novels and short stories and whatever, and I may never see them, they may never see the light of day. Whereas with a play, I'm kind of the Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney. Let's put on a show. You can kind of just do that anywhere. It's like, okay, we're gonna meet on my front porch. Got a great front porch, and I haven't gotten that desperate yet, but that's, community theater is out there for people to do, and a lot of times we don't get chosen, again, as Black women, in the regional theaters and where you actually make the money. And so, but at least I know my work is out there. I can charge an entry fee at the door, or quite often I'm that person who I don't have a nonprofit, but I think I just finished my 5,000th grant today. And so I can write write grants to pay the actors a little bit, and buy a couple of costumes and things like that to get my stuff out there. So I do actually do a whole lot more plays than I do. Well, like I said, this is my debut novel, and it took forever. So in the meantime, I just kind of hustled my plays and stories.
I'm saying fabulous. I'm on mute. Fabulous, because I come from a Caribbean tradition, Puerto Jamaican, Puerto Trinidadian, and there are jokes about Jamaicans and hustle. Mm-hmm. And I embrace that so strong.
Yeah.
Isis, as I think of you as the resident entrepreneur, but forgetting that you are all actually entrepreneurs. Do you have suggestions for ways that a content creator can advance their content, non-traditional ways even? What have you seen and what have you used yourself?
Yeah, what have I seen? It's a conversation, right? Like when people are like, I hate there, right? And I'm like, I get that. It can be time consuming. But it's like if you were dating somebody, you wouldn't be like, I'm not gonna talk to you for like 6 months, right? I'm gonna just hit you up when I need you. Like, you know what I mean? You can try that. It would be an interesting relationship. Like you check in on them, you text them every day, like you call them, right? And that's kind of like how I think about social media. And it's like a two-way conversation. So it's not like it's like, oh, like with Sistah Scifi, like things I've done, like I've discovered a lot of amazing books and content from the community. Like we talked about the Janelle Monáe when that book was announced with HarperCollins. I think it came out in April. So I think in October somebody sent me the link. Like I don't know what you do it in your living room, but you need to be on this, sis, right? Because it becomes like a collective activation. And also, if there's something you hate, there's somebody out there that there's something that they hate that you love, and there's an opportunity for collaboration. Like I will probably never write a book, but I love to read. I love to read, but I read really slowly, and I love to connect readers to content that they're excited about, right? I'm a professional fangirl, and that's kind of like where I operate. And so I need content creators so I can fangirl about their work, right? And so then I like try to like that's my lane. And so like where are the content creators and where can it feel authentic and have those conversations? So just accepting like if there's stuff that you hate, then collaborate with somebody because they probably love doing that.
I so hear you. Like marketing geniuses are out there and they love what they do. God bless them.
Yes.
I
want to go back to something else, if I may.
Absolutely, but may I take just a quick second because this is an announcement to the audience. We will be taking questions. Put your questions in. I don't believe it's the chat, but in the Q&A, I believe it is, and we will get to them. Sorry, Kathya. Yes, please go on.
No, this has been going on through my head since the topic about horror stories. And, you know, Black women's lives are kind of horror stories. Any old way, a lot of times. Oh my gosh, I just watched something on TV last night, a documentary about this Black woman. It was, you know, it was a horror story, but it was her real life, right? And so often we don't have a way to really express that or get people to understand the horror of Black life. Because you can read all the facts, you can see the headlines, and it's not the same as a story. You know, you get, it's a lot more intimate when you hear a story. And with my plays, I guess probably with all of my writing, but in particular with my plays, because plays are very intimate. There's somebody right there in your face. And I use that opportunity to tell the horrors that have happened to my people. And again, I live in Seattle, which is you know, very white space. And so a lot of my audiences are, you know, majority white. And they don't want to hear it. You know, it's uncomfortable for them to hear the horrors. My last play was called The Negro Passion Play, and it's the story of a Christ-like figure named Emmanuel, with 12 disciples, including Malcolm and Rosa Parks. And so set during the civil rights movement. But there were opportunities during that. So for instance, instead of him being crucified on a cross, he's lynched on a telephone pole. And, I did a lot of research about real life lynchings, and I put it in there, and fortunately, that part of it was right before the intermission, because people lost it. The audience lost it because they'd never heard the reality of what lynching actually was, and so it's always like, oh, that person was lynched, but you don't talk about he was castrated and there were 10,000 people, white people watching, and they cut off his toes and they, wrapped him in their little lace hankies and sold them as souvenirs.
You're reminding me of something an elderly person once told me years ago. And when I asked them too many questions about their life, their response was, I don't know if you could hear it. I don't know if you could bear it.
Yes.
So,
it's true. And I think if we had to live through it, the least you can do is hear it. The least you can do is bear witness to that. I don't think that's too much to ask.
I think Tanner too. Sorry, Taz, who's in Seattle tonight, actually has a great quote. Black history is Black horror, right? Yeah. And, like Michele is like, and other, I think, African-American horror writers allows us collectively the space to kind of navigate that trauma, right? And hopefully heal from it, right? Because sitting in the triggers for me is not fun, but having a way to like heal from it, yes, in a community space can be very powerful.
And particularly just following up on these awesome comments, that thinking about areas that we are writing about that other people don't, the politics of beauty, something that I write a lot about, that has these push-pull adornment, and then other challenges, sexual harassment, experience under slavery. I mean, I think it's also taking some of that work that's very specific and allowing readers to engage with it in new and different ways. But there's so much, I feel like so much of our experience actually yet to be uncovered and talked about. And for those folks who are with us tonight, if you haven't seen the wonderful edition, Sycorax's Daughters, edited by Linda Addison and others, which is a collection of came out a couple of years ago. One of the best collections of short fiction, poetry, prose, with a array of Black women writing across kind of horror, but looking at this larger context, as Kathya and all of us are talking about. And it's a really powerful collection. Sycorax's Daughters.
Could you put that in the chat, Michele? Thank you.
I will find it and put it in the chat.
And just real quick, the play that won the French First Award in Scotland had to do with the politics of beauty, called Black to My Roots. And it's about Black women in hair. And I just did the 20th anniversary edition of it this summer. And so many things have changed, all the while so many things have stayed the same. And I always have a talk back at the end of that play, because there are so many stories. You can't even possibly write them all. All of the horror that Black women have gone through just around their hair, something that you would think would be that should be a relatively benign, subject. But it's not, and now they have to introduce the Crown Act, which I guess should have been introduced years and years ago, decades ago, just to say, treat me with respect no matter what my hair looks like. You can't just discriminate against me because you don't like my hair. So.
And we might have to team up, because my first novella, Renew You, was basically about what if a trip to the hair salon could kill you, and what if there's actually a virus that is being transmitted through everyday hair care products. So we might have to team up and with as our work is coming out, and even though you have a novel and I have a collection of short stories, but it seems like we have an intersection there.
Absolutely, I'd love it.
Do it quick. I want to read it. Do it quick. Thanks so much. We have only, I think, 11 minutes, so I wanted to get some of the audience questions. I'm opening the questions now. The first one is, to all the lovely panelists, what are your thoughts about magical realism and the mystical connections to Black culture? Do you see these connections in your work or in the books you read?
Yes. But I'll let other people respond in detail. But yes, like Michele said,
you started. Go ahead.
Speculative fiction is an umbrella, and I personally feel like all of it is like a playground that I can explore and run free in. But at that intersection of Black and Indigenous culture, that's my focus. And I definitely include magical realism. I love magical realism. That also harkens back to traditional cultural practices, right? That's also really powerful for me. But so yes, I'm here for it.
I love that. In my own writing, I'm often inspired by family stories, and there are quite a few stories in my family that the old folks swear are true, including a 63-year-old woman who gave birth to children, magical twins that carried the family's history down the line. And these are true stories, but to anyone that I've told them to, it sounds like magical realism. So yeah, it's a beautiful part of the culture that does inform, I know, my writing, and certainly I've seen it in a lot of others. I'm thinking of Nalo Hopkinson. I just mispronounced her name. What is her name?
Yeah.
Hopkinson in Canada. It's Nalo? Okay, Nalo Hopkinson.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Some of her, okay. I'll stop there.
It's interesting because I've heard, and I've heard other authors, particularly folks working who identify as Latinx, have really kind of troubled that term, or troubled the more the publisher's investment in aspects of magical realism. But I really like the way you framed it, Isis, around, and also you, Ellen, around looking at the stories that have been told, how we perceive memory, how we perceive history, and playing with that. Yeah.
Michele, thank you. Next question. All of these questions could take a lot more discussion because these are fun. Next question. What advice would you give to young writers of color? How do you balance your values and the hustle? Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Okay, well, I mean, really, if I were to give, I feel like the best advice that I could give to young writers, or the advice that isn't given as much, like write as much as you can, write every day, develop good habits, is get therapy. Like that's really my advice. I feel like to want to put your voice out there in the world, as a young writer, coming out of being a young person is an extremely, oppressed position to be in, even, for if you're not dealing with gender, class, race, and sexuality targeting, young people are just disrespected right and left, and told that we're not smart and that we don't have anything to say. So I think for everybody, kind of coming of age and deciding oh, I have something to say can be really challenging. And wherever you have trauma and harm in your life around your voice or being important, it's going to show up. So I'm like, don't wait. Start now, addressing whatever trauma is there. And, the other thing that I'll say, I did a lot. So I'm also in my mid-50s, and I did a lot of work on myself in my 20s, and it really helped. It helped my writing in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that I remember in my late teens, early 20s, before I did a lot of work on myself, there was this way that I was looking to my writing to make me appear to be the kind of person that I wanted to appear to be. I had anxiety. Was I Black enough? So my stories were like Black stories, Black, 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 and that, they were kind of surface, right? Because I was anxious about my Blackness, and that came through in the work. And then when I worked on myself and all the places that I was insecure, then I could actually tell a story that wasn't about trying to come across a particular way. I could be more of a vessel for stories that wanted to come through because I didn't have an agenda that my work was supposed to make me cool or cover my insecurities or, any of the things that we may be trying to do in our work. And so that's really it. And then the other thing is, we've talked about this a little bit before, the writing world is full of rejection. Rejection. And if you're Black or female, the writing world is not just full of rejection, but outrage. What? You rejected me? But you said yes to this garbage. This white mediocrity. I give him the money, that's part of it too. And so you gotta people talk about being tough, but I don't think it's so much about being tough. You have to have a way to be they said no to me. Now I'm gonna cry my eyes out and be jacked up for 24 to 48, 72, maybe 96 hours, and then I'm gonna get back to my life, right? And so developing the support system, the tool, the reality check compass, to manage all that. And then the other thing that I'll say, quiet as it's kept. So you got to have this capacity to deal with all the feelings that come up with rejection and failure. And then you have to develop the internal infrastructure to deal with all the feelings that come up with success. And those are also hard. Imposter syndrome. Are people jealous? Sometimes people are, sometimes they're not. All those things, those internalized things that come up, especially as Black people and women. Part of our internalized oppression is about competing with each other, tearing each other down. And, we have to have some kind of deep community where we can find grounding within ourselves and within community so that we can stand together in spite of that and, be connected to each other in friendships where sometimes one person's career is going great and the other one's it's kind of in the toilet, and you got to be able to figure out how do you manage that. So I think those those are the things that I would say that I think are pieces of advice that I didn't hear as a young author, but I needed to figure out.
I love writing groups, and I can talk about them for a long time, though with care. You have to choose those groups with care. So I have horror stories and I have great stories, and love writing groups, but support, look for it, give it, find it, share it. Anyone else on the subject for young writers?
I just want to echo what Aya said, and understanding rejection is a process, but it's important not to self-reject. If we don't get our work out there and submit, because I'm also a creativity coach and work with people across kind of the creative spectrum, and so many people are so afraid to even get their work moving forward, and that's that perfectionism and procrastination. And so kind of addressing those that thinking about that inner work as well is really important. But you got to get your work out there, right? You've got to get your work out there, and then have the literary community to support you as you're navigating the acceptance or the rejections, right?
I read something by Stephen King early on in my career where he talked about being rejected, and I'm going to make up a number, 67 times before he was actually published. And so I just put a nail on my wall, and every rejection letter that I got was like, one down, 66 to go. You know, because it's a part of it.
I'm gonna go get a nail now. There are more great questions, but we don't have much time, and I wanted each of you to get a chance to say last words that you want the audience to remember and to take home. And we can go in reverse order. Isis, you came in. Is Isis still here? I know she had to leave. Oh, she had to bounce. I'm so sorry. I'm afraid that we might have lost her. She had to.
Isis had to run, but it was wonderful to have her for what we did. Yeah.
Kathya, do you want to be the first in that case?
So what's the just last
words that the audience and other panelists should hear?
I am filled with imposter syndrome right now. Because I think all of you are such amazing people. It's been so such a privilege to be a part of this group. And I'd also like to thank Aunt Lute, because I don't know where my book would be without them. Just to have somebody, because as we mentioned briefly, my book is a novel in rhyme. Novel in verse, and it rhymes, and it's in Black dialect. And I got so many rejections. So, like, I can't even understand what you're saying, And so just to have a place that my first meeting with them, I just cried, because all of the things that I had gotten rejected for, they embraced. And that's such a wonderful feeling. And so again, just don't give up. There's somebody out there who gets you.
Beautiful. Hey, Aya, do you want to go now?
Sure. So thank you so much to Emma for helping me put the text from Fighting Chance Books into the chat. So I'm going to add the Fighting Chance Books website. And I'll just say, it's that Toni Morrison quote: if there's a book, that you feel passionate about and you don't see it in the world, you're going to have to write it, and I just want to offer that to everybody. The feeling of imposter syndrome that so many of us have so much is really, it's just the internalization of the ways that we've been told that we don't matter. And, like they say, speak powerfully, even if your voice shakes, right? Like sometimes we have to write that way. And we just have to do it anyway. And I'll just also say today, November 1st, is the first day of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. And, I am a big fan, and I'm going to be doing some NaNoWriMo work this year. And it's just a great sort of community. And for anyone who doesn't know, in the month of November, people write a novel within the month of November. Do not try to get that novel published right away. You got to do some revision. But, I think people are attracted to writers and writing and books, because a lot of times they're passionate about things they might want to say, but are scared, and so if you've ever thought about writing a book, or there's a story you just can't quite find, I think it might be your story to write. And this is a great time. So check out, I think it's nanowrimo.org. That's online, and just a great way to sort of jumpstart your own creativity.
Thank you. Michele.
Oh my goodness, I am just so honored to be a part of this conversation, and I want to thank Aunt Lute for putting it together. And like Kathya, my short story collection, Doll Seed and Other Stories, is coming out next year. And it was so powerful as someone who had been writing over 10 years for that for some of the stories and getting rejected in terms of short story collection, or getting kind of close but not yet, finding a publisher who understands, who has, you know, high criteria, high standards, and understands the work and the process and how to really mentor and support writers, it's been a real gift. And I would just say, this is like, when we come together like this, we create believing mirrors for each other and for, you know, for people out there. So find your, you know, for those of you who are writing or want to write, you've got to find people who mirror that worth back to you. And I guess the last thing I'll say is Beverly McIver, who's a visual artist, she basically said, worthiness is a learned behavior. So we don't come into the world always feeling worthy, and it's something we have to practice. And I think sort of understanding that that's part of your writing process as well, feeling that worthiness, and also knowing that really we are the collective future in terms of, you know, the stories that we have to tell. We're really not just demographically, but aesthetically, we are the future for those new narratives breaking through.
Thank you. Thank you all. I am honored and blessed by your presence. And thank you, Aunt Lute, for giving me the opportunity to come and meet with you all and hear these words. Thank you. And Emma, hey, we'll talk more. I'm also especially delighted that so many of you are on the West Coast. So, hey, Michele, when you come out to the West Coast, give me a call. I'm out here, you know. Hayward's really close to San Francisco, so just, you know. Yeah, where are you again? But anyway. Berkeley, oh, see, we have to do coffee. So yeah, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much. And I should give the mic back over to Emma, but I could so go on.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone. This was such an amazing conversation. It's so nice to be in this space with you all. And this is really a magical thing to be doing in what I think are like historically terrible and hard times emotionally. And I just want to express again so much gratitude, and to everyone who's attending and everyone who is watching it in the future, as we will be distributing this recording, because each of you shared so much wisdom, and Isis as well, even though Isis had to run. This was so amazing. We have put some surveys in the chat if anyone wants to offer any feedback, or, you know, if you're also looking for ways to stay connected with us, we have some links for how to follow Aunt Lute. And Kathya, Michele, I'm so glad that you both have enjoyed your experience with Aunt Lute. That's very nice. I encourage everyone submit to Aunt Lute. That includes Ellen and Aya, who I'm so excited to be in conversation with. Just throwing that out there. But yeah, thank you, everyone. I want to let you all go and eat dinner. And to Michele, who is not on the West Coast, go to bed. Yes, go rest. Everyone rest. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet all of you. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellen.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for a great conversation.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.